So we, as most of you know by now, we hold these monthly Q&A sessions on the first Wednesday of the month. And I try to have a guest or two to talk about different issues related to community as we're experiencing them. And today we're focusing a little bit on transportation. And to give context, so many of you are familiar with our community and have been here in person. We are located 2 miles outside of downtown Ithaca, and the Finger Lakes it's a hilly place. Ithaca is a hilly place. So we are on the West Hill. Downtown is down in the flats at the bottom of Cayuga Lake. And Cornell is up on the East Hill. Ithaca College is on the South Hill. So we have a context here that impacts transportation, right? So the hills, the climate, I'm hearing that I'm actually in California right now, but I'm hearing there's some snow and ice in Ithaca today. So those things do have an impact, and it means that the number of car trips per capita in Ithaca is actually quite high. And in our community, we do still rely on personal vehicles to a great extent. And we are working on that. It's something I think a lot of people in our community would like to keep thinking about and working on. But there are limitations. So I mentioned the climate, I mentioned the hills. Even though we're 2 to 3 miles from Ithaca amenities, that can take up to an hour if you wanted to walk, and then of course you have to walk uphill. And not all of those roads have sidewalks. So there are some safety concerns. There's some issues around mobility and ability and being able-bodied. So those are considerations. And in the grand scheme of things, as eco-villages go, we are actually fairly close to an urban center. I would categorize our location as suburban. Many eco-villages are far more remote, in more rural places and having to rely on vehicles in those cases. So we do have the advantage of being proximate to a small urban center. And that means that we have more transportation modes available to us. So this is an aerial view of our property, and you can see there's our interior road, Rachel Carson Way, that connects up to Mecklenburg Road or Route 79. And I show this just to reiterate, within our property, it's quite accessible, quite walkable. It's literally seconds between each neighborhood. But if you ever want to, leave our property to go buy groceries or go to school or work, you would either need to walk the stretch of that road to the highway and catch a bus, or rely on a car. We do have school buses that come and pick up school-age children, fortunately, but you see here in the center, we do have quite a bit of parking infrastructure because most households still have cars. So I counted maybe eight to 10, let's say 8 people out of 210 people do not have cars. So the majority of households have at least one car. Although I will say some people have, most families by this point have really strived to get down to one car per household, but we do not have much policy around that. So we do not restrict the number of vehicles a household can have, or any kind of policy like that. We also don't incentivize not having a car. I recently visited the LA Ecovillage in downtown Los Angeles, and they actually provide a subsidy. So if someone comes to be a resident there and they don't have a car, they get a discount on their rent. So there are some strategies out there to try to encourage not having a car. We do have some bus connections. So you see here a bus shelter that was constructed at the road a while back, and we did work with, back in the day, the regional transit authority to put a stop at our property. So that's something, and it's a direct route to downtown Ithaca and to Cornell. So quite a few people rely on it to commute to work if they work at Cornell. Unfortunately, the routes just got slashed. So we only have 3 runs a day of this bus. So it's not a perfect system, but it is there. It takes about 10 minutes to walk this road. So if you're living in one of our neighborhoods, walking that Rachel Carson way takes 10 to 12 minutes. Sometimes you get lucky, and as you're walking to the bus, a resident will offer a ride either to the bus stop or downtown. So we do have some of that informal ride sharing that will happen. And I'll let Steve talk about some of that in a moment, in terms of like our infrastructure and culture around ride sharing and car sharing. But you see here, there's a work party going on to clean up the bus shelter. We have that bus line. There's also another bus line that services the West Hill that one could use, that runs more frequently, but it is a 20-minute, 25-minute walk from our homes to get to that. So that's the transit situation. It is present, it is an option, but it's not always the most convenient. And then I'll just touch on a couple of other modes. So you see here, one of our neighbors' front porch where they're keeping their bicycles. We do have some folks who bike around. This happens to be Graham Odenson's porch, and she has a business on property, so she uses her bike simply to get from her house to her business. There is an electric assist bike share program now in Ithaca that's dockless. So that is an option, especially if you are downtown and wanting to come back up to Ecovillage, you could use that system. We are within the service area for that, but it doesn't really work in the reverse, because if there are no bikes up at our property, you can't rely on that to go downtown. Some people do find electric assist bicycles very helpful, again, related to our context of being on a hill. And then there are people who bike around just for recreation. I would say there's more recreational biking than transportation biking. But I showed this image also to do with storage. So I think it's really important for communities, if they're forming or developing, to think about storage, especially for bicycles. Not everyone has access to a garage or a carport. The first neighborhood did end up putting in a bike room or bike shed that's locked. So we do have that option for one of our neighborhoods. But Steve and I have talked about, and I'm contemplating a proposal for a village-wide bike storage, because that's another way of incentivizing having a bicycle if you have an easy and safe place to put it. This other image is taken from our Tree Common House, which is a 4-story building, looking down at the parking area for the second neighborhood. So just to clarify our parking situation, we have carports for each neighborhood, but we don't necessarily have a carport space for every household or every car user who wants it. So there are carports. The carports are supposed to be used for cars, not for storage. And then you see everyone else is parking outside, out in the weather. And we do have also some parking for visitors, but it's still a car culture, and that's something that we should work on. Especially if we call ourselves an eco village. continuing to talk about how to reduce the number of cars, the car usage, how we can share those facilities. So I do occasionally borrow neighbors' cars, sometimes for free, sometimes a fee. That's very informal right now. But that is an option for some folks to share and borrow other residents' cars to supplement the transportation, and there is also some informal ride sharing that happens, as I mentioned. So I think I'm going to stop there and turn it over to Steve to talk about his experience with transportation, especially around trying to get car share going in community.
Okay. Well, the three big issues of car sharing, first of all, as Caitlin pointed out, we do informal car sharing now. People lend each other the cars. At times, people have even declared a car to be a shared car and created the Google Calendar to use it, and put a notebook in there in which you wrote your name and your mileage down, and paid periodically to the owner. That's kind of an under the table operation, because the insurance companies, if they knew you were collecting money for the use of the car, they would say, hey, wait a minute, you're renting the car, you can't do that, stop, or we will cancel your insurance. So you have to be a little quiet about it, which is awkward for a place like Ecovillage, where we're trying to trumpet to the world everything we're doing. Now you can car share operations. I mean, we have Ithaca Carshare. Ithaca Carshare exists in the village, in town, and they recently survived an insurance crisis in which a New York State finally got a rather restrictive New York State law changed, make it easier for car share operations to get insurance. But they're still talking about like 3 or 4 times what an individual would pay for the car to insure the car. So that's one aspect of that. The other thing is that because of that and other things, running entirely on shared cars is not economical unless you hardly ever drive or rarely drive. I once calculated that Ithaca Carshare was a break even compared to owning a late model car if you use the car 20 hours a week or less. Now, there are lots of ways we could get creative about this, but the fact is that for car sharing to work well, you need other transportation options. You need transit and ride sharing. Now, Caitlin just sung the song of transit, and TCAT cut their routes because of a shortage of drivers. So one thing I suppose could do is people could decide to become bus drivers. We've talked to them periodically. I've talked to them periodically over the years about improving the service here. The most promising way to do that is the route that comes a mile away that Caitlin mentioned, moving it a little bit closer, moving it to West Haven Road. But I noticed ever since their director of new service planning moved to Seattle, they haven't filled that position. So there's probably nobody in particular to talk to about new service at this stage of the game. I don't know. I did.
Do you want to
Yeah.
do you want to talk about when we had Ithaca Carshare cars?
Yeah, we did have an Ithaca Carshare car. It didn't get used much because it didn't get used much, they took it away. It didn't get used much, I think, because people felt they couldn't rely on it being available because there was only one of it. So the whole transportation problem is really a how to get to the right place problem. If a gang of people from Brooklyn came and stole all the cars, you would probably get together and invent a new transportation system. You probably wouldn't say, oh, well, let's all go out and buy new cars. But how do you get to it step by step? Because half a dozen Ithaca Carshare cars up here would work if enough people got rid of their cars. And enough people would probably get rid of their cars if we had half a dozen Ithaca Carshare cars up here. But which comes first? And how do you finance the transition? That's really the question.
Yeah, something else I forgot to mention, that is an important context is age and ability, right? So our community, 30% of our population is 65 plus. And that's a trend in a lot of co-housing and intentional community that there can often be a high percentage of retirees and older people. And so that's also a factor to consider, right? Like not everyone is willing or able to walk to the bus or sit or, stand around waiting for the bus to show up or walk downtown. So that's another reason for why we have so many cars, is that's really the only good option for many folks.
But you also have to consider that not everybody is going to be able to drive.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
so I have argued for many years that transportation is actually an accessibility issue. You've had people move out of Ecovillage because they could no longer drive. Is that an embarrassment or what?
It's a great point. It's a great point.
So that's where we get into transit and rideshare and things like that. And TCAT at least was trying. I don't know what the status of it is, but they were doing a last mile ride service in Dryden, where they partnered with Gadabout, which is actually, I think, organizationally tied to TCAT in some way, to pick people up from different parts of the village and take them to the bus stops. And that's something that we could potentially do, especially if we as a village, or you guys as a village, I guess it's not really me anymore, but I still feel like I'm part of it. Anyway, could kick in some of the cost, or maybe even have volunteer drivers.
Yeah, and Gadabout, for those who don't know, is it's the kind of sort of shuttle service or small bus service that can help people connect to transit options, or helps get people to
for seniors and people with disabilities. So I think they're, a creative, energetic group could, a little bit of money could probably do a lot.
Do you want to just briefly mention the times that Ecovillage has tried to create our own car sharing?
Well, we've done that informal car shares. Those worked in the past and could continue to work. It could be more organized. I know the software Gaarder that we use to help organization, we are working on a car share module for it to help for scheduling shared vehicles, because that's of interest. There's a worldwide co-housing car share interest group that I can put people in touch with. I came close to starting a car share here. We bought a new car. I still have my old clunker. So I said, well, I'll donate my old clunker to a car share, and determined that, okay, I actually could form an LLC. There's a one on from that worldwide group. There's a group in Seattle that did this. They had a donated car. They formed an LLC. They donated the car to the LLC. The LLC got insurance for it. And I was able to do that here in Vermont. New York insurance laws are trickier. I don't know, but so I was getting close to making it happen when the muffler fell off the car, and it became clear that that car was too old and decrepit. You wanted it to be old and cheap so that we wouldn't have to spend a lot of money and get it started, but it was too old and cheap. So I put that on the shelf until somebody else here has a car they want to donate. But I would be happy to help anybody who wants to try and pull that off.
Yeah, so just to flesh that out a little bit, there are a couple different models I've encountered. So again, the challenge in New York State and at Ecovillage is that you have to keep things pretty much under wraps, under the table, because once the car is considered to have a commercial purpose, or you try to have multiple owners on one car, the insurance issues become insurmountable. And we've had a few families look into that. In fact, we had one family recently buy an electric vehicle, and they were hoping to have a couple go in on that with some people and maybe share the ownership of that, or use it as a car share type car. And we kept bumping up against the barriers around insurance. So the solution for now has been informal car share, where they developed some rates that they thought were reasonable. Otherwise, with a lot of the informal car share, it ends up being the national rate for mileage reimbursement, which I think is 65 cents right now, something like that. But they worked out a rate, and it's, you sort of, and they, I don't know how they're handling the scheduling right now, but there is that informal setup. But another arrangement that I've come across is in Hundredfold Farm, which is in Pittsburgh or Gettysburg area in Pennsylvania. Their LLC bought the vehicle. And that's something that Ecovillage could consider. We just haven't pursued that as far as I'm aware, but their condo LLC for the community purchased a vehicle, and then they're the ones that hold the insurance, and then they have to just list all the drivers that might be using that vehicle. But the caveat is that vehicle is really intended for community uses first. It's a truck. So that's parameters that they've put on themselves. But that's one model that I've seen. And then of course, famously, there's Dancing Rabbit, which is a community in Missouri, and they're more remotely located, but they chose to not allow residents to bring a personal vehicle, if you want to move into that community. And they have a car share program where they have shared vehicles that are owned by the community. So there are options out there. I think Steve's point is a good one. Once people have that sunk cost of owning a vehicle, it's really difficult to get them to change. Just a couple more points that I forgot to mention. We do have EV charging for almost every carport space now. So that's something that we got grants for, and each user pays for that charging themselves, right? So it's assigned to a carport space or to a household, and they're the ones who are paying for those charging costs. But that is part of our infrastructure now, is pretty widely available EV charging. However, I would say we have room to improve on public charging in terms of visitors and overnight guests. We don't have good access for charging in those situations. It's a conversation we've been having. We also do have rideshare here. So there is Uber and Lyft in the Ithaca area. And then And then I'll just mention, I also have a scooter, like a electric Segway scooter. So there are things like that. And Ithaca did have a Lime service in the past with scooters, but it didn't last. But that's something else that communities, especially urban communities, use to supplement that last mile to connect people to transit options. But again, the hills can be a challenge there. Steve, do you have any last comments or stories related to
Well,
transportation?
I do know that two couples did share ownership of a car some years ago, Liz and Jared, and a couple who since moved out. And that works. Tricky part there is when you change owners, you're basically selling the vehicle. And the state says, oh, sales tax, ka-ching. Um, so LLCs are perhaps a better way. I don't know if it was actually tried to get recently to get since the law was changed, it might be worth trying to get insurance for an LLC to own a car. Because more insurance is now available in New York. So there's some possibilities there, I think.
I
I
think
think
that,
there are possibilities anywhere if
right.
somebody
Well, and
wants to
I think that's
actually charge
key.
ahead.
Yeah,
And
that's key, right? Is if you have enough people who are willing to try to make a change like that or live those values. But back to the mobility question, I believe that our elder group, and I don't know, Cece, if you know anything about this, but in the third neighborhood, there's a group focused on elder life. And I know there have been conversations about shuttle service or finding ways to provide rides for people. I don't know much more about it than that. If either Steve or Cece know, but I think that happens in other communities as well, that sometimes they have a community owned vehicle or some arrangement where shuttle services are provided, or or there's a sort of organized grocery trip once a week or something to that effect. Those are things we haven't really done much of, except for that informal version. And something else we haven't mentioned is our rideshare app. So we have a WhatsApp group, and that's one of the ways that we try to communicate and make it easier for people to offer rides and ask for rides. So that for us is happening either on the WhatsApp or sometimes also through our email listservs. Or some people have specific arrangements with car owners and they just communicate directly with them.
yeah, I'll just say it's generally not too hard to find a ride down the hill
Yeah.
and out there on the road,
Yeah.
and somebody will come by, except like Sunday afternoons,
Right.
times like that.
Or if you need to get to the airport at 5 a.m.
Getting a ride up the hill
Yeah.
on the spur of the moment is considerably more difficult. And I actually, one of the schemes in my scheme parking lot is an app that could be used to request a ride. And the trick for this app is that if you put a request, it would only be sent to people who were in town at that time, so that everybody doesn't get blingled when someone wants a ride up the hill. For a
Yes.
while, we thought somebody was gonna help us create that, but it didn't happen.
Yeah, so I think as most of you are probably gathering, there's there are technical pieces to this, but there are also behavioral and cultural pieces to it as well. And
Yeah,
then of course the context is important, right? Like where the community is located has a lot to do with how the transportation plays out. Should we open
oh,
it up to
yeah,
questions?
questions, comments.
And again, questions can be about anything related to Ecovillage at Ithaca. It doesn't only have to be transportation related, but does anyone have a question, you can either raise your hand in camera or use the raise hand icon. I see Cece.
I just by chance did contact someone at Carshare, and they said they would be interested in talking with us. So I'll forward the email to you, Caitlin.
Okay.
But they said, you know, getting started back up again, their fleet's greatly reduced. They went from 30 cars to 24. And also that they wouldn't be able to get something started with us until after at least a year.
Mhm.
So, but it was a little bit, it was promising. And she said she would like to discuss other ideas for us. So I thought that was a nice opening to possibly move forward.
Yeah,
with
that sounds good.
Yeah, and I'm definitely falling in that category of people who drive less than 20 hours a week. So for me, that would be the ideal solution, I think, to get rid of my car, use Carshare.
Great, thank you.
Excellent. Well, feel free to pick my brain as needed.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions?
Come on, somebody must have something to say.
Hi, Natalie. What do you got?
Yeah, I was wondering about, so I love the idea of car sharing first off. I've heard a lot about the different eco villages that are getting into car sharing. I'm someone that I work from home most of the time. So I don't do a whole lot of transportation. I hate having to have a car. But I wonder too about the non-vehicle or alternative vehicle transportation options in Ithaca. I know obviously because of where you are, because of the hills, but also because there are no bike lanes and the roads can be kind of tight to the edge of the road. What does that mean for biking in the area? And do you know of any plans in Ithaca or through the Eco Village to improve some of those?
Well, there are some bike lanes in town. I mean, the city has decent. Both the city and the town believe that bikes are good. But, you know, it's hard to put a bike lane in the road that doesn't have the room for it. Elm Street going up the hill is not a very heavily traveled road and is reasonable to bike. If you can climb the hill, which really requires for most of us an electric bike and a powerful electric bike. I don't know what the story is with the current bike share bikes, how well they do at that.
I haven't used them yet, so I can't comment personally. It's worth mentioning too that the buses have bike racks on them, so you could combine biking and
Yeah,
bus.
they do that.
Yeah, I do not. There are a couple of hardy souls that do commute by bike, and or you know might have a cargo bike. Most people do use electric assist in those cases. It just really helps to supplement when you need it. And yeah, I know. Does that answer your question or?
Yeah, I think so. I think one of the things I was just, I've seen, what's the road that leads up to Rachel Carson Way?
Route 79, Hector Street, yeah. Hector Street.
Yeah. I was just noticing that, it's not a very bike friendly road. So I was wondering if that impacts people.
It does, and people tend to not use that road for biking. There are other routes that people will take.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think, to the question about the city and town, it is best practice when road work is being done or new developments are going in to improve that infrastructure for complete streets, meaning streets that have accommodate more than just vehicles. But that's a slow process, incremental process, right?
They did work over Hector Street and they put in a sidewalk. But only you could bike it downhill if you can manage to go. If you're willing to go 30 miles an hour on your bike, it's easy to do down that hill.
But I
up
think,
that hill would be,
yeah, I think there are a couple of options, so it depends on people's comfort level. But yes, they're not optimized for pedestrian and bike
Elm
travel.
Street works fairly well. I used to ride down it a lot, and go the bus up.
Yeah, that's what I do with my scooter also. I'll ride, we have an internal sort of gravel and grass access road that connects to West Haven Road, which is sort of the another road that borders us. So people will cut through our property to connect to West Haven Road and do that kind of thing to avoid Route 79.
That's interesting to hear.
Mm-hmm.
I have one other thing that I'm thinking, but I'll let somebody else go if they've got a question.
Oh, go ahead. You might as well.
Okay, I was wondering if there's a lot of talk going on about alternative vehicles. Obviously there's a lot of talk around electric cars, but there's also this growing movement toward bridging the gap between bikes and cars. So bikes that not only have electric assist, but a powerful one, and as well as a covering and mirrors and everything. So it essentially functions like a car on the road. I wonder if there's any talk in the Ecovillage about having cars or having vehicles that are like that for people to use as almost like a car share. I don't know if that's something that's coming up, but it's something that I'm super excited about. So
Neighborhood electric vehicles, I think, is one of the buzzwords used for them. Haven't seen any in Ithaca lately.
Yeah, I haven't
It could work because you could go up Elm Street. You wouldn't have to deal with the state road. And as she said, Elm Street and West Haven Road, and then up our access way.
I haven't heard much conversation about that. Once in a while, I think about, would it help us to have a golf cart or that scale of vehicle to help people get around the property or to connect people? My parents used to have a home in the Villages in Florida, which is massive 55 plus community, and has this incredible golf cart infrastructure. And that's an interesting option for certain climates and topographies, because you don't have to have a driver's license to use a golf cart. And so it works well, especially for people who can't drive a car anymore, or for whatever reason. So I think there's options to explore that. I haven't heard a lot of conversation around that. Certainly the climate is a factor, and you would probably want something that's street legal. So you could use it beyond just our property. But yeah, it's a good point, and I think that there are quite a few options out there that probably we could look into, but it takes a burning soul or a group of people to really dive into that, and we just don't have that at the moment.
I just sung a link into the chat for an article about them.
And there's also this whole world of like drone delivery. And I was in Los Angeles, I mentioned, and they now have these robot delivery carts that roam around the streets. So,
Yeah, you could get low speed self-driving vehicles, which can't be used on public roads. But if I were building an eco village now, I would have the parking area way away and have a few of these to carry people to and from. And we could use one to carry people to and from the bus stop, for example.
it's a great idea.
And because you see, since they'll drive themselves, once it's taken, you don't have to worry about how do you bring it back, right? It will bring itself back from the bus stop.
And that does exist, right? I'm in the Bay Area at the moment, and there are driverless vehicles that are taxis. So this technology is coming. I think there's always that question of cost and practicalities. But yeah, I think there are a lot of exciting directions it could go. Other questions? I should mention, we do have quite a high adoption rate of plug-in hybrids and electric vehicles in our community. And that's a chicken or egg kind of question. People are more likely to switch to electric vehicles if they can charge, right? So it really was critical for us to get the charging equipment and make those options available. And that's, something else that continues to evolve, and as the cost of those vehicles keeps lowering over time, that, it's not a perfect solution, it's still cars, but we do have quite a few folks that are getting off of the gas vehicles. More questions?
Well, if you think of them later, you can write to Caitlin or me.
Yeah.
Always happy to brainstorm.
Yeah, and again, we're open to questions not related to transportation too, or we could also talk about strategies we've seen in other communities. We have quite a few folks here who've lived in other communities or visited other communities or studying other communities. And I think that's really helpful to share resources like that and see how other intentional communities have tackled some of these questions. I think grants are still important. So I visited Muir Commons in Davis, California, and they were able to get a grant to provide electric vehicle charging for each household. And I spoke with Swan Market in Oakland yesterday, and they can't afford to put in that infrastructure without financial assistance. So that's another component to all of this, is the size of your community, the financial resources of the community, potentially being able to find supplement.
Ecovillage got money from New York State to put in charging stations.
You did, yeah. And there were some caveats to that, right? Like there were some certain parameters.
They always come with strings.
Yeah. And Steve, you might know better than I do, but for example, the chargers had to stay in the same location for, I don't know, 3 years, 5 years.
Something like that, yeah.
And that was for data collection. So we received the grant from NYSERDA, right, Steve?
Yeah.
And so for them, it was partly to gather data and information as part of the exchange there. So yeah, there can be strings to some of these things, but that can make things challenging.
Just takes a little more thinking.
Yeah.
Figure out how to fit it into the pattern.
And and of course there's the compatibility of, different vehicles require different kinds of charging. We've mostly figured that out by we use a certain kind of charger, the juice box, that can accommodate most vehicle types. But that's an evolving technology as well, right? And so that's something to keep in mind as electric vehicles evolve.
Caitlin, you talking about your studies in urban planning made me think about, I used to work at Sidewalk Labs, which is like a sort of different corporate version of this that is we talked so much about alternative mobility stuff. And I remember that being yeah, there's just like all of these sort of plans for, I think, a slightly bigger sort of village. And I feel like the scale question and like where most people need to get to ends up being a really important part of it. Like how much you can sort of bring things to, like if people need to get groceries, how much do you just have like a grocery drop off,
Yeah.
right? Versus I have all these like, you know, I'm sure you've seen those crazy like drawn plans for that kind of thing, and a lot of as you talked about sort of data collection downsides to that sort of thing as well. But I'm happy to share resources if that's ever helpful.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
would say that, you know, the whole how do you get started problem, if you're creating a community, you have more options there. You can possibly not, you know, won't deal with a set of entrenched, in this case, vehicles.
From scratch. Yeah, I hear you.
If you do it right.
well, and I think that's an important point about living in community in general, is that there is a social engineering or at least an influence that happens where
Oh yeah.
if you see people who are able to live without a car, personal vehicle, or you see people who are walking to the bus, waiting for the bus, that influences people, and it at least gets people thinking about it, and you know, can I do something differently? Can I make a change? So I think that happens with all aspects of many aspects of our lives. When you're in community, you know, seeing people composting and gardening and these things can also have an impact, and it might be slow and incremental, but at least
It's significant. I really think
yeah,
so.
you're building that culture. And that's I think important to remember as well, and that's one of the reasons why we encourage people to visit us and see what we're doing. You know, we don't claim to be perfect and have it all sorted out, but at least we can show alternatives and ways that we've done different from, you know, sort of the typical suburban development might be doing them. I think too that the technology piece is important when it comes to scheduling and communication, and I think there's more work to be done probably internally around that for us, and just helping people know that the WhatsApp is there, reminding people you know, that these options are out there for sharing those resources. And that's kind of a hidden side of transportation, right? Is like, how do you find the schedule for things? How do you, you know, like some of my neighbors didn't even know how to look up the bus schedule, that kind of thing. So making that information more transparent or knowing how to find it is also part of getting people to adopt some of those modes. And you know, something else we didn't mention is having children and pets is a factor too, right? Like people, it's a lot harder for people to go car free or make a change when you have small beings to transport.
Well, you know, my older granddaughter, who's 5 years old, just loves to ride the bus. Much enjoys riding the bus much more than riding in the car.
That's awesome. I previously worked for the city of Portland, Maine, and they did a very innovative thing, which is they switched all the high school students to the city buses. So rather than using school buses to transport high schoolers, they gave all high schoolers bus passes, and they did add some additional routes. Like they made sure that the service area was covered, and you know, that's brilliant because you are combining resources. You know, you're sharing those resources, you're removing vehicles from the system, and then you're also just raising whole generations of people to be comfortable using public transit. So you know, I think again, that's sort of a cultural and technical solution, both. So, obviously, if you're living in LA Ecovillage or Swans Market in Oakland, using public transit is much more common and accessible than a lot of other parts of this country. Any last thoughts or other kinds of questions? Well, let me just share a couple of closing thoughts. So we hold these sessions monthly, and the next one is scheduled to be January 3rd. And I'm proposing to talk about creating social connection and the ways, both the physical design of our community and also sort of the programming are vehicles for creating social connections. And again, we also field questions about our community in general. It doesn't just have to be about that topic. And then we do have a quarterly newsletter. We have social channels, and we have a website where we list our programs and things that are going on, information about tours. So that's our website, our socials, my contact information. If anyone wants to get in touch with us. And with that, if there are no other burning questions, I think we can wrap up for today. Last chance, last call.
I was just wondering, maybe you should do a bus trip, field trip to get people to conquer their culture.
Yeah, I did that once upon a time a while ago.
Yeah,
Yeah, should do that.
make it fun. Go ice cream.
Yeah, it's a good idea. It's something we should probably do every year or something. Yeah, it's a good idea.
How much does it cost to go on the bus to Ithaca?
I think we're still at 150.
Yeah.
It's pretty affordable as things go. And actually the quirk about our system is that the pay what's the word I'm looking for? Like the machine on the bus that accepts payment is often not working anyway. So half the time it's free.
And if you work at Cornell, it's free. And if you work at several other places, it's free.
Yeah, so their bus passes, and there's a local program called I think it's called Way to Go Ithaca, and if you sign up, it's free, but you get all these resources. So you get credit with the Carshare program, you get something like 40 bus rides. It's an organization intended to educate about transportation options. So they kind of give you all these perks to incentivize people to use some of those programs. But yeah, the buses are pretty affordable. The other thing to mention is that we do have a small airport here, and we have regional buses to New York City, to Syracuse, and some connections like that. So again, I think we have those things mostly because the schools are here. But that is another form of connection to larger airports, or to like the Amtrak station is in Syracuse, for example. So we do have some more regional transportation options as well. Ethan, were you going to ask something or? No, okay. I saw you unmute, so I thought maybe you had something to share.
Just preparing to say thank you.
Got it. All right, well, let's wrap up. And I thank everyone for your time, and let us know if you have further thoughts or questions. And we'll see you when we see you next time around.
Thanks,
Nice
Caitlin.
meeting you folks, and feel free to pick my brain in the future.
Yeah, thanks, Steve.
Okay.
Nice to see you, Natalie.
Nice to see you, CC. Thank you, guys.
Yeah. good to
Okay.
see you.
Thank
Bye,
you
folks.
all so much.
Yep.